Hello and welcome to this webinar organised by the Foundation for Integrated Transport on secrets for a successful bus operation. My name is Stephen Joseph. I'm a trustee and currently chair of the foundation. I'll say a few words about the foundation itself and about our speaker, Roger French, and then hand over to Roger to present on this very important topic. The Foundation for Integrated Transport is actually 10 years old this year. It was set up by Simon Norton, who was a brilliant mathematician and long-term transport campaigner, and particularly keen on better buses. And Simon sadly died 5 years ago, in fact, 5 years ago this month, and has given the foundation money to spend out to support integrated transport, in particular transport in the case of climate change and transport as a basic right. We've been pursuing projects that we think Roger would have approved of, that Simon would have approved of, and we've been able to find some good projects that have supported better public transport, better bus services around the country. We've been running a series of webinars to showcase some of this, but this is a slightly different one. Roger French, who's our speaker today, has been a trustee more or less from the beginning of FIT, actually. And he is, and latterly he's been vice chair of the foundation, giving very helpful support and advice in running the foundation and in its grants. He comes from a background of long-term knowledge and involvement in the bus industry. He was for a long time managing director of Brighton Hove Buses, one of the most successful bus companies in the country. Since his retirement from that, he's developed a new career as a blogger and a social media presence as bus and train user, sharing his knowledge and experience of traveling around the country on buses and trains and seeing what they're like from a user's perspective. And some of what he's done has been influential, actually, in terms of changing practice on the ground in the management of public transport in this country. He's also, I should say, the patron of the Young Bus Professionals, and we're going to put in the chat the link to their forthcoming conference in Glasgow, which brings together younger people working in the bus industry and supporting them in their career development. We thought Roger is stepping down because he's done his 9 years as a FIT trustee, so he's stepping down next month, but we thought we couldn't let him go without capturing his enormous knowledge of how to improve buses, how to make them run properly. And that's why we're doing, we put on this webinar. We thought it was important to get Roger to share his secrets of a successful bus operation based on all his experience over the years. So Roger, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks ever so much for those lovely words of introductions, Stephen. I'm going to do one of those things now that people say on these things. I'm going to try and make the tech work, as they say, and do my sharing of screen. And then we should be ready to go. Yeah, I think that's all done now. Yeah, secrets of a successful bus operation. But after today, it won't be such a secret. And actually, it was just a sort of hook to draw you all in with. I'm going to just say a few words, as Stephen has already done, about the wonderful Simon Norton, who, as Stephen said, passed away 5 years ago exactly this month. And in a way, this presentation is dedicated to Simon because we first met about 15 years ago when he was quite an active member of Bus Users UK, and they had their AGM in Brighton. And I was asked to give a presentation about how we managed to double the number of passengers travelling by bus in Brighton. And it's actually the same presentation, pretty much, that I'm going to actually give now. And Simon was quite impressed, I think, with what we'd achieved. And we got in contact after that when he established through Stephen the foundation. And he never ceased to impress me. I thought I got around the country by bus quite a bit, but Simon never ceased to impress me about his travels. He would go to the far-flung corners of the country by bus and come back, and then he'd tell me how we could reschedule the routes on the way, because he was such a brilliant mathematician. He could work out the scheduling and the duties in his head as he went along. And he was just simply a lovely man, and was taken from us all too early. So let's begin by defining what I mean by success. Secrets of a successful bus operation. Well, what is a successful bus operation? First of all, I would say it's growing the number of people traveling, because you can't stand still. Because if you stand still, you're going to lose passengers, because people move away, or sadly, people die. And you've got to be replacing them all the time with new passengers, quite apart from the fact that we want to achieve modal shift, because we want to deal with the climate emergency that we're facing. And people traveling by bus emit lower carbon emissions than using their own transport. But I would also add the qualification that we've got to get growth in passengers traveling in a financially sustainable way. And that is in two ways. Firstly, how much the passenger pays, and whether they feel that's sustainable from their income point of view. And secondly, if we're putting public money into running successful bus services, whether that public money that is going in is sustainable in the long term. Now, I'm going to take, as I've mentioned, the basis for my talk, the 20 years where we saw growth in Brighton and Hove passengers, not people travelling with Brighton and Hove. And I couldn't get 2013 onto this graph, and that's the year I retired. But we just hit 50 million passenger journeys a year when I retired. And I went back to 1993 when we were just under about 23 million. So we more than doubled the number of people traveling. And I'm always wary when people talk about percentage increases, because the number of people who've said to me, oh, we've put on a new route, or we've done this to a route, and we've increased the number of people traveling, and we've doubled it. And you say, well, how many is that? And I say, well, we've got 8 instead of 4. And it's not particularly impressive, but we managed to do this and get Brighton and Hove to be the city with the most use of buses per head of population outside of London. So we're talking big numbers here, millions more people traveling. But the other thing I want to mention at the very outset is that in terms of in a sustainable financial way, this was all done pretty much all on a commercial basis, with no need for public funding at all to directly do it. So how did we do it? Now, I should also mention from the outset that there are factors outside of running buses that affect how you run buses. Typically, for example, is your population growing or declining? What's the particularly density of population is important when it comes to vibrancy of urban networks. The economy. I mean, Brighton and Hove luckily ticked all these boxes. I was very lucky. It was a vibrant economy, a nighttime economy, 2 universities, a regional hospital, very strong employment. We didn't have all these out-of-town warehouses. We had a town centre retail. We didn't have out-of-town retail. We hadn't had a lot of road building, and the residential areas were very much lent themselves to bus operation. And these factors don't apply all over the country. And so it may not be possible to have a successful bus operation simply because of these external factors. Now, my analogy, my long-tried analogy has always been, it's like baking a cake. You need the ingredients to bake a cake, and you need the infrastructure in which you're going to bake the cake. Now, in terms of the ingredients, I would say that in Brighton and Hove, in running a successful bus operation as we did in Brighton and Hove, there are 5 key ingredients. And you might be wondering why the first one I'm going to mention isn't reliability. And it's because reliability, in my judgment, is a given. Whenever Transport Focus or Bus Users UK used to do their surveys, or we as a bus company did, or other bus companies do, they'll always come back and tell you the most important thing a passenger wants from their bus service is reliability. Yeah, well, why did you do a survey to know that? Of course it is. We all want things that are reliable. And therefore, I take reliability as a given in exactly the same way that the cake has to be tasty. You wouldn't make a cake, wouldn't bake a cake that's going to be not tasty. And similarly, we're not going to put a successful bus operation together that isn't reliable. It is a given. There are 5 key ingredients that the bus company needs to bring to make for a successful operation. And I'm going to spend just a few minutes discussing each of these 5. And the first is the frequency of service, its regularity and its consistency. Now, all these 5 ingredients to make the cake, to make successful bus operation, are essential. You cannot leave an ingredient out of making a cake because you won't get a cake baked. And similarly, you can't leave any of these 5 ingredients out. They are all essential. They're all complementary to each other. But if there's one that is more important than the other, it's the equivalent of the flour that makes a cake. It is frequency of service. And this will vary depending on whether we're talking about a city, a large town, a market town, a village, a hamlet, or interurban. But it is still important, no matter what that frequency is, applicable to the area you're serving. My experience tells me that generally for urban areas of a population of 200,000 or above, and Brighton and Hove was pushing about 300,000 if you took the extremes of it, you should aim for 80% of your passenger journeys would have a bus at least every 10 minutes or better. 10 minutes, in my view, is what you can do when you can then encourage passengers to just turn up at a bus stop and one will come along in a few minutes. I mean, typically, on average, they'll come every 5 minutes if you're running a frequency of every 10 minutes. Because if someone turns up for a bus and has just missed one, they'll wait 10 minutes. If someone turns up and one's just coming, they'll wait 0 minutes. So on average, across those 2 extremes, they've waited 5 minutes. And in my experience of traveling, I can get to a bus stop and I'll wait for 5 minutes and then I'll look at my watch. I think that's the tolerance, the average tolerance time for bus passengers is 5 minutes on an urban service. Now, it has changed since the advent of real-time information, and I'll come to that a little later. But for now, one should try and get 8% of journeys at every 10 minutes. You can't get more than that because evenings and Sundays, there aren't so many people traveling, and so you can't afford to run on a viable basis a 10-minute frequency right late into the evening, perhaps. And so for those journeys, they won't necessarily have a bus every 10 minutes. For a 100,000 population urban area, then I would say 80% of the passengers should have a bus at least every 15 minutes. Now, I'm going to give an extreme example of what we did in Brighton and Hove over that 20-year period with route number 25. In 1993, it ran every half an hour between Falmer, which is on the northeast edge of Brighton, where the universities are located, down to the city centre, down the Lewis Road, with 2 single-deck buses. And the capacity was around about 120 seats per hour, therefore, 120 including standing as well. By 2012, 20 years later, we'd more than 20 times that capacity by increasing the frequency using ex-London bendy buses running every 5 minutes, supplemented by double decks running every 12 minutes. And even that frequency, such had been the growth in bus patronage over that 20-year period, still couldn't cope. And indeed, by the early 2010s, that route was competed against by another operator, such were the number of people wanting to travel. It didn't just happen overnight, it happened gradually. And I want to say that, I should also add that, by the way, that we were running buses every 10 minutes in that service right through the night as well. It became one of our most successful night buses on a commercial basis. But that was an extreme example, but across the city urban network, either April or May, depending when Easter fell, and September, just as the universities were returning, we looked around to see which bus routes can we improve. And we organised ourselves so that we only changed services on those 2 recognised dates a year. There wasn't constant change going on because people don't like that. And when we alighted upon which route had potential to increase its frequency, then we would increase it to the extent we were looking to expand by around about 2 to 3% every 6 months to meet the 5% increase in passenger traffic that we were getting. We were both feeding the growth, but encouraging the growth. And so typically we were looking for bus routes that perhaps had the ability to withstand an increase in frequency from every 30 to every 20 minutes, or at the other extreme, from every 6 to every 5 minutes. And every April or every September, there was an improvement. And it therefore encouraged this idea of continual improvement to the bus network. Sure, there were some withdrawals and there were some slimming down of frequencies in areas where less people were travelling. But the news, the culture, the feeling was there was continual expansion of the bus network, which, as I say, both fed the growth of passengers and encouraged the growth of passengers. Before leaving frequency, I do just want to mention the 2 other words I've added there, regularity and consistency, because it does concern me that some operators are now falling into what I see as a trap of using artificial intelligence, they're alleging. I'm not alleging that they are using it to devise schedules for bus routes that are more realistic to everyday traffic conditions. And I'm finding now, as I travel around the country, and I blogged about an extreme case between Slough and Heathrow Airport recently, operated by First Bus, where they've now, in my judgment, ruined a half-hourly frequency every half an hour into one that's now inconsistent, because it's every 28 or 32 minutes or 31 minutes. It varies according to different times of the day when the bus is leaving. And in my view, we've got to be very careful as an industry that we don't go all out for this, because I think it will destroy what on routes that run every 15, 20, 30 minutes every hour, where people want to know that minutes past the hour is the important thing. Now, it's not just Brighton and Hove who've been very successful in improving frequencies. And I do just want to highlight around the country that there is an amazing number of very successful commercially operated bus networks. And here, some of the most famous ones are Nottingham and Reading, top left, bottom right, and Bournemouth and Poole, top right, and Oxford, bottom left. Now, interestingly, in each case, as in the case in Brighton and Hove, after we merged with the municipally owned bus company in 1997. And by the way, I took account of that in the graph shown earlier, that all those figures were harmonized to include that. The bus networks here are pretty much not, I'm going to use the word advisedly, monopoly, but they're not monopoly in that they're subject to competition, but you don't have one bus operator knocking the hell out of the other. And a good example of that is in Oxford, where for many years, Stagecoach and the City of Oxford Bus Company were competing against each other. But latterly, they have realised and come to realise that working together in a partnership approach does make for a much more organised and sensible way of selling the network to the public. And that has also happened in Bournemouth and Poole through acquisition with the Go-Ahead owned company trading as Moorbus, buying out or taking over what was a defunct then bus company, the Yellow Bus Company. Reading and Nottingham have long held exclusivity, so to speak, of running the networks in their towns and cities. And there is no doubt that that does help. But if you look around the country now, the most towns and cities are now dominated by one operator, and I'm sure that does help. I also want to mention that interurban routes are also absolute key in terms of getting growth, as we did. Oh, I don't know if you can now see, but my thing has disappeared. Has it disappeared from your end as well? Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. interurban routes are key and also very, very important, and improving frequencies of those. And I've just shown a few examples here of some of the most successful interurban routes around the country, as are tourist routes as well. And it's just amazing how open top services and leisure and tourist buses provided on a commercial basis are now prospering all over the country. Another example is airport routes, where we see good examples here. I've just taken 4 examples to show you. And of course, frequency is absolutely key if you're running buses in the airport sector. And then not forgetting the rural end of the networks that are out there, whether you're running twice a day or 2 hourly, it's important that you do it regularly and consistently on a frequency that everyone can understand. I just also want to mention that a low frequency route can be a successful route. I'm not just saying you've got to run every 5 or 10 minutes to be a successful bus operator. The bottom right-hand example there, Tavistock Country Bus, is in fact Britain's least frequent bus route. It runs actually twice a year between Tavistock and Dawlish. And it is the most successful twice a year bus you could find, because it runs full up. And it runs on the 5th Saturday of the month between April and September, which, if anybody wants to give it a ride this year, is on the 29th of June and the 31st of August, because they're the only months with 5 Saturdays in them in the summer. And I highly recommend a trip on it. It really is an amazing route. Right. Let's move on to the second ingredient, the eggs, I would say this is, and this is price, because it's very important, I think, to these days. We live in a commercial marketplace, a retail marketplace, where price is absolutely dominant. It's everywhere in front of wherever you go. And as well as price, also giving value, packaging things together. Now, the bus industry for years was absolutely hopeless at this. It was almost a state secret to tell passengers how much it was going to cost to travel by bus. And of course, this was an absolute nonsense. As well as that, it was regarded as very complex and difficult to understand what you could do or couldn't do with a certain ticket. And at Brighton Hove, we were very keen to get through all that and have something that was simple. But I should also say, of course, that at the moment, and now we're in the 2nd year of it, we've got an amazing arrangement whereby the maximum fare in England, for those of you watching this in England, there's a maximum fare, generally speaking, across most bus companies of £2, funded by the government. So you might think I'd be absolutely thrilled at this, because it's simple and it gives good value and it's very high profile. I'm not a great lover of it, and the reason being that it's going to have to come to an end. Or I suspect my money, my £2 smart money on, is that it isn't going to come to an end. Because just in the same way that the concessionary fares for older people, no politician would ever end that. It would be political suicide. By the time this thing comes to an end, which, as you can see, it's been extended 3-4 times now, 4th time is going to end at the end of this year. After 2 years of people paying £2, is a politician, which may be just after an election, and they haven't been in government very long. Are they seriously going to do away with £2 so that people travelling from Leeds to Scarborough are going to have to suddenly pay £16 again? I can't see it. But if it doesn't end, if it continues, that effectively is meaning the government is financing the industry to and passengers travelling, I should say, to a limit that is, I suspect, unsustainable. And it worries me that the bus industry will end up like the BBC, where they have their licence fee fixed, and then every year the government tries to pin down that without it going up, and pin down how much money they're going to give the BBC to provide what it has to provide with less money. And I fear that the bus industry will be in the same place with its maximum fare fixed. So I'm a bit worried about that. And it's interesting that some what are regarded as quality small bus companies, and believe me, they are quality. Links I've taken and Delaney as examples in the Peterborough area and in West Norfolk, haven't joined the scheme. They don't think that it's a viable proposition for them or sensible in the long term. And I share their view. But you might wonder why I'm saying that, because for quite a time back in the early 2000s, we actually did something similar in Brighton Hove, but we went the whole hog and had a flat fare of £1. No matter how far you travelled or whether it was short or long, it was £1. It was the ultimate in simplicity. And we got huge growth when we did that. It was the greatest financial risk I took as managing director of that company for about 25, 30 years, because before we introduced the pound fare, we had 3 fares. We'd narrowed it right down to 3. We had 80p, £1, and 130. And when we introduced the pound fare, we had no idea whether the 80p people who faced a 25% fare increase would walk instead, and we wouldn't end up with anything from them. And we didn't know those people who were paying £1.30, we were giving 30p off to, get down to £1, whether we would generate enough new people at that level to justify the 30p's we were giving away. It was a dodgy, tricky period we went through. But within 6 months, we knew we were onto a winner, because people were traveling more often. People would come up to me and they'd say, "Oh, I'm using your buses now, it's £1." I'd say, "Well, where are you going from and to?" They told me, well, say Hove Town Hall to Brighton Town Centre. And I would say, "Well, you know, it used to be 80p. And of course, they didn't know. We encouraged them to travel simply because they now knew how much it would cost, even though it was more expensive than had they known how much it would travel. And that's why in the early 2000s, our growth in passengers really started to take off, because we made it a simple to understand fare structure. Now, inevitably, we couldn't keep it at £1 forever. I was hoping we might actually join the euro and we could go from £1 to €1, but that actually Gordon Brown put the mockers on that. So instead, we went to 120. But at the same time we went to 120, we made the day ticket 240. So for 2 journeys, people got extra value. They could travel as many times as they wanted for the same price as 2 journeys. And there was a time, I think it was when we went up to 130, we made the day ticket 250, so that the day ticket was even cheaper than the single fare. I'm giving you those examples because as a commercial bus company, we should be alive to the way we promote our fares in a way that is attractive to entice people to travel. Now, of course, this was all pre-tap on, tap off. All this wasn't invented in the early 2000s. And I envy my colleagues still in the industry with the sort of exciting things they can now do to encourage people to travel in a simple way, as has happened in London for many years, of course, with Oyster. I'm also envious of still encouraging young people to travel through pricing. And it upsets me when I hear local authorities, and I know it happens in Scotland now, up to the age of 22, they can travel for free. Whereas I think young people between the age of 18 and 22 can be encouraged to travel by paying in an attractive price, giving them good value. And before leaving pricing, apparently it was at a bus company only yesterday in the Harrogate district, but other than Harrogate Bus Company. But other than that, I think it's the only known time this guy's been on a bus. I also want to mention the older end of the market, because I have already said politicians are going to come on, take off the concessionary fare scheme at their peril. But it's going to have to happen one day, certainly in London, Liverpool and Wales it is, because at the moment that's age 60. And they're now talking, aren't they, at some point about the retirement age increasing to 71 even. Well, how can we give free travel from age 60 to 71 when people are earning money? It just doesn't make sense. So at some point, that nettle is going to have to be grasped. Right, I'm going to move on a bit more quickly now to cover the other ingredients. Regular investment in new buses. This is essential. Now, at Brighton Hove, Obviously, it's changed over the years, but there's always a reason to buy new buses. And at one time, it was because low floors had been invented. And we were keen to take advantage of that. And our philosophy, our policy was a bus would last for 15 years, a double decker. And to get the best of that, it's best to therefore invest in a 15th of your fleet every year. I'm not a great lover of this, let's replace the whole fleet at one time. Now, I know it's all about the way buses are propelled these days, with electricity or with hydrogen. But where it's done, and I can understand why, because you've got to pay for all this expensive infrastructure. But if you're replacing the whole fleet overnight, it's going to age altogether. And people are going to start to think after 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, these buses are all getting a bit old here. Whereas if you're replacing a 15th of your fleet every year, people think you're forever modernizing your fleet. It becomes the culture, just like if you're increasing the frequency every year, because you can get your MP along and you do a launch every year and you bring the latest 20 buses in or 25 buses in. But the likes of Oxford and Coventry, which are going all out now to become Britain's first electric bus city, whereas of course it was Inverness as pictured here, they're all going to age together, and things change over the course of time, in particular interior fit outs. And this is an example from the Transdev Blazefield group of companies. And here's an example launched only yesterday in Reading, where I was over in Wokingham to see these wonderful buses. Now, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have had buses to this quality inside. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had. And so I'm a great believer in regularly investing in new buses and taking advantage of the latest gizmos that people expect. Even London's getting in on the act now. For years, they didn't want to get involved in the interiors of buses, but bless them, they're even now trying to up the quality of buses in London. Now, information, promotion and publicity is absolutely essential in raising the profile of buses if you're going to get more people travelling on them. A bus timetable, a printed bus timetable is essential, absolutely essential. And those bus companies that say it's all online, well, I'm afraid you need to go to somewhere like Cornwall or the Lake District or the Isle of Wight or Bournemouth and Poole and actually see passengers thumbing through timetable books and deciding, yes, where are we going to go, because they see a map and a timetable and encouragement to travel. All the most successful bus companies continue to produce printed information and attractive information at that. Let's make it enticing. And, you know, this is how it's going to be in Manchester. Well, good luck with the B line, but I have seen more attractive orders of service at funerals than timetables issued by Greater Manchester PTE. This is not going to encourage people to travel. That's just information. It's not a sales document. And people need maps as well to encourage them to get out and about and see where buses go. And not just maps online, but maps you can pick up and maps you can put on walls as well. I said I'd come back to real-time information. There used to be a phrase, the greatest thing since sliced bread. When I used to give this presentation, I used to say, it's now the greatest thing since real-time information, because it revolutionized waiting for a bus. It gave confidence waiting for a bus. I mentioned earlier about waiting 5 minutes and then looking at your watch. If you've got these signs in front of you, you don't look at your watch. You look at the sign and you see the bus count down and it appears when it says due. And all credit to Brighton Hove City Council. We were first in the game with these signs. It was at the time a Siemens manufactured arrangement. And I was a bit skeptical about these huge signs they put up on the street. But I absolutely realized within a matter of days what a most successful thing that was. Instead of hiding them inside shelters, It's advertising your services on the street for motorists driving by. They can see just what a regular, frequent service you're running. And the fact that the bus comes when it says due is just the icing on the cake, so to speak. But nowadays, of course, it's available in your pocket, on your phone, in a whole host of different media, both with bus company websites and bustimes.org, which is an amazing treasure trove of information. And I don't think the bus industry promotes this well enough, to be honest. Quite often I'm at a bus stop and I'm looking on my phone, seeing where the bus is, and no one else in the queue has a clue. And I often say to them, well, it's just coming round the corner in a couple of minutes. And they're amazed how I know, because not everybody has that awareness. Also, in terms of information, you've got to have good branding. And I think most city operators, as you saw earlier with the examples I gave, most successful city operators do brand their most important routes. These were the 5 key routes in Brighton and Hove. We had about 25, 30 routes altogether, but I would say about 65% of the business of the company, getting on for 70%, was on these 5 routes. And so that's why we up their game and promoted them with individual route branding, as Reading do very, very successfully with all over coloured advertising. And bless them, even London's now realising you can't have everything red if you want to grow the market. And they're now and much pleased to see it, bringing in orbital limited stop bus routes under the Superloop brand, with the latest one coming up in another 10 days, I think it is. So yeah, well done, TfL. You're finally getting there. I'm going to give you 2 of the most successful promotional campaigns that we did in Brighton and Hove, because it's all about promoting the bus. You've got to promote it. You can't just do information. You've got to encourage people to travel. And the I'm on the Bus campaign that we launched was an absolute huge success. Basically, what it did was feature real people living in Brighton and Hove, visiting Brighton and Hove, and we got them to say the reason they travel by bus, and put them, as you can see, overly life-size on the side of the bus with their endorsement. And there's nothing better than an encouragement endorsement to travel by bus by real people. They're saying, yeah, I'm proud to be on the bus. I'm not like the old Thatcher so-called hopeless failure at age 26 because I've been seen on a bus. No, I'm absolutely proud to be on a Brighton and Hove bus. And ultimately, this was so successful, we had a waiting list of people wanting to be featured, that we had it on half the fleet, over 100 buses going around the city, promoting these messages so everyone could take it in. It was just so heartening to see. And I realized that we should also extend it, as we did, to people working for the buses, because we're part of the community. A successful bus operator is part of the community. Often we were almost the largest private sector employer in the city. And so we wanted to get over the fact that it's important that you realize buses are not just buses, they're run by people living among you in the community. And it was, again, so successful that I even joined in as well as we brought the thing to an end, and explained, yeah, I'm also on the bus and I'm proud to travel by bus, as I used to do, but not only in my leisure time, but also as part of my work, taking my managers out there for a ride around at least one morning a week. But we never put any commercial advertising on buses. I mean, it just saddens me so much when I see adverts for car hire, taxis, cars, and all sorts on the backs of buses. No, we should be promoting the positive about buses. They're a very successful media, the buses, and we should use them to the full. And we should also be mocking the motorists. The motorist has it all their own way in the print media and the mainstream media. And we should be telling them, look, you're mad to use a car in this city. We're going the same way on the bus. And you wait ages for a bus. You know the old phrase, you wait ages for a bus, then 3 come along together. Well, in my experience, limited experience, when I ever used to drive a car into Brighton, and I very, very rarely did, it was only in extreme circumstances, you would wait ages for a parking space. And then you'd wait ages for a parking space. You'd spend all your time waiting for a parking space. The other successful thing I want to mention is bus names. It's a very simple thing, but it humanizes the bus. We put the name of a deceased person who had made a significant contribution in their life to the city. We put them and commemorated their name on the front of a bus. And again, it was a huge success. I used to get more correspondence in the days when people wrote letters suggesting names to go on the front of a bus than I did about the bus services themselves. And this is Dennis Hobden, for example. He was an MP, very famous MP in Brighton because he won a very marginal seat, and that's his widow. Proud to be there with his name. And this is the cover of a book we brought out. There was so much interest at the time in the background of those bus names. And there was a very famous photographer based in the city, an award-winning photographer called Roger Bamber, and he took many of our photographs for our bus times as well. And this is his widow, Sian, who Roger recently passed away, and I'm pleased to say my successors have carried on this tradition. And she was there for his name. But all sorts of people from all different backgrounds, from the Prince Regent to just someone who's a community leader who passed away, are commemorated on the front of a bus. And I leave you with the thought that there can't be many bus companies in the country who appeared on Pointless as a category on a celebrity edition where people had to come up with the famous names, because there are some celebrities as well, Dusty Springfield, Adam Faith, and a few others who are on the front of Brighton Hove buses. So those are just a few examples of the sorts of things you need to do to promote buses. And there's finally the fifth ingredient, perhaps this is the icing on the cake, but it's absolutely key, is, and I've used the word deliberately, legendary customer service. Not just customer service, but legendary customer service. And it's the driver who's in the driving seat of this. And indeed, Transport Focus tell us that aside from punctuality, the next comment that's made that brings a reason for a good journey, 18% is mentioned, is the driver. And drivers score very well, I'm delighted to say, in any research that Transport Focus do. But it's not just the driver, it's the whole ethos of the company needs to be about having a presence and wanting to hear about what customers are saying and giving out information to them and being responsive. I was delighted for a few years we were able to actually have a bus and train integrated travel shop within Brighton Station, and here it is. Sadly, it didn't last because they wanted to make it a W.H. Smith's, or sock shop or something like that. But for a while, it actually worked wonderfully. And I just want to pull out a really good example of good customer service, colleagues at the Trent Barton Company. I mean, look at this. We are always, this is from their website. It's really good to you. We like to talk. We're always on hand to talk to you. If only our big groups could be like this. And look at that at the bottom there. We love a good natter, you know, and I can tell you, I can vouch for the fact when you ring that, you don't get we apologise that we're experiencing a very heavy call volume at the moment, etc., which is so naff. And they even have a postal address you can write to. I mean, how many companies these days actually let you have a postal address? I defy you to find a postal address for an Arriva, First, or Stagecoach bus company. It's almost impossible. And that's it. Those are the 5 ingredients. If you put all them together, you will get an exceedingly tasty cake. You'll get a successful bus operation. But you gotta have an oven. You've got to bake that cake. It's no good just trying to get your ingredients together and getting your cake mix all ready. You've got to put that in an infrastructure. And hello, surprise, surprise, there are 5 key ingredients for good infrastructure. And this won't take so long to go through because I realise time is moving on. Roadside furniture, a clear responsibility of local authorities. And there are some wonderful examples out there. I'm heartened to see the improvements that have now been made in so many towns and cities. This is Gravesend. It's simple stuff, but it's complementary to what bus companies are doing to improve, as I've shown, buses and the interiors of buses. This is the shop window of people buying the bus journey. This is the airport lounge, the ferry terminal, and bus stops are absolutely key and important. But unfortunately, there are still too many examples of appalling, absolutely appalling infrastructure out there. The former I just showed you was in Skelmersdale. This is in Southgate, North London. Would you really expect someone to sit in comfort and wait for a bus here in Runcorn? This is my award for the worst bus shelter in St Neots. When you're in it, you can't see out of it because of the grime and the dirt. And that's been caked on for don't know how long. I went to it a year ago and took some photographs and was back there recently. And at least someone's punched a hole now, thoughtfully, so you actually can see if a bus is coming. So if it is raining, you don't have to wait outside to see if a bus is coming. And for a while, local authorities were really good for a while at buying capital stuff, all these pods that these were going to be the answer to providing information on the streets. I mean, it never was the answer, and there never is, but there never seems any money to take these things away. You got them installed, but there was no money to maintain them and no money to dispose of them. And this, I just saw this not so long ago in Runcorn. Absolutely appalling. It doesn't entice me to want to travel by bus from this bus stop. Priority on the road is absolutely key, and many local authorities, again, are doing some wonderful things here. And we were very, very lucky in Brighton and Hove to have a forward-looking partner in the Brighton and Hove City Council who really came to terms and got to grips with the provision of bus lanes and bus gates in the city and on roads coming into the city. Most famous of all on the A259 coming in from Newhaven through to Brighton, where this road was always congested, and it was just one lane coming in and one lane coming out. And by judiciously moving the white line over a bit, enough space was created for a bus lane. And interestingly, I did a survey myself one morning, took a couple of colleagues, and we went down to Rottingdean Crossroads, and we just stood there for the peak hour and we counted the number of people. And interestingly, we found that nearly half, and indeed I'm going back now 15 years, and I know it's now even more than half, but at that time it's just under half. It is now more than half of the number of people traveling are in, and you can imagine what the vehicles are. They're the buses, in less than around 2% of the vehicles. That's the nature and the justification of why you need to do bus priority. And this has encouraged the bus company, both in my time and since I've retired, to improve the frequency, such that the frequency along that route now, whereas years ago, I can go back to a time when it was half hourly between Brighton and Eastbourne, and it was half hourly from Brighton to Peacehaven. It's now literally every few minutes. You can stand on that one at one of those stops, and the number of buses coming along there is absolutely amazing, and they're all full and in the peak hour. And that just shows what bus lanes can do. You need to enforce them, though. Absolutely. Make sure that the fines are effective too. And you need to maintain them. And this is perhaps way ahead of its time. This is the Runcorn Busway, a new town that was built around putting in a very excellent example of bus infrastructure, way ahead of its time. Unfortunately, it hasn't been kept. And I was up there last year and took these photographs. And you know, it's just so sad. It is so sad to see that it's no good just putting in infrastructure. Just like you've got to maintain buses every week, put them over the pit, make sure the brakes are working. You've got to do the same with infrastructure. You've got to have effective parking policies in a city and a town if you're going to have a successful bus operation. And you've got to have draconian enforcement as well, so that people know that it's just not worth stopping on a yellow line and they could even be towed away. And I'm pleased to say Brighton Hove City Council, rightly, because they took it seriously, got a reputation for this. And I was there all the time supporting them, because politicians need support when they're taking courageous decisions, like introducing draconian parking policies. And if you do it effectively, it's the equivalent of a congestion charge. You don't need a congestion charge if you've got high car parking prices and you've got effective enforcement. You also need, ideally, park and ride. This is High Wycombe, who has a very successful park and ride site. Unfortunately, in Brighton and Hove, we never managed to agree that there was a site available effective enough to run that. But most towns and cities, I think, could do with a good park and ride operation. And finally, in terms of infrastructure, and we've got to get around this control of roadworks. We can do so much damage to the operation of a successful bus service. There's only one thing worse than seeing the three-way control sign at a temporary traffic light, and that's seeing four-way control, because you know you're going to be there 3 or 4 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes. And when you're running buses every 5 minutes, that means the one behind you is probably with you now, and you've got two working in tandem. And there's only one thing worse than a four-way control, and that's that you close the road completely. And the utility doesn't give a stuff about what happens to bus passengers. And either the local authority or the bus company try and put something together, or financially they're not able to. I would like to see much more draconian control of when utilities can put roadworks in and how long they're there for. And I know it's a trite thing to say, but the number of times I've been around, and frankly, there's no one working there. There's no urgency that you think is there. And I think it does need to get to grips with. And finally, just a quickie on land use policies, which I mentioned at the very beginning. It depends where, I think it's like regional hospitals and universities and out-of-town warehouses and things are. Here's an example in Gwent I picked up a few years ago. They put a brand new hospital called the Grange University Hospital, and they stuck it right on the edge of the town, as you can see there, even on the opposite side of what effectively is the bypass. How they thought people could get there by a successful bus operation, I just don't know. It baffles me. And, you know, where you've got all these big, huge warehouse retail units, or you're going to put commercial developments on the edge of towns. I mean, a Foundation for Integrated Transport funded project called Transport for New Homes, a hugely successful campaign group that was set up by my colleague Trustee Jenny, has tried to highlight the fact that you've got to build houses with buses in mind, not with cars in mind. So those are the 5 key ingredients for infrastructure. Now I'll leave you with a question. Who's best equipped to bake the cake, and who's best equipped to be the infrastructure overseer? Because in my judgment, they're not the same person. I reckon you need a commercially minded approach to provide a decent, frequent, good value, price sensitive, new investment of buses, excellent information and promotion, excellent legendary customer service bus operation, which is supported by people who really get public ownership of public infrastructure, public control of publicly owned assets, know how to deal with political situations in terms of what's needed with parking and bus priority measures. And the two skills, in my view, are different. But I reckon you can work together. And that is the key to it. And that was the key to our success in Brighton and Hove, with Brighton and Hove City Council and ourselves as the bus company working absolutely hand in glove. We both had the same objective of getting modal shift, of getting more people travelling by bus. For the City Council, it was because of environmental reasons. For me, it was because I was running a private company, and I had to deliver for shareholders. And I wanted to do that through growing the market. Now, these guys, there's no doubt over the next few years, they are going to take back control of bus networks. It is going to happen. It is going to be franchised. I personally think that it is not the best way of running a bus network, but my time had, as someone tweeted me the other day saying, my time has gone and got to move on. But I put it to you that London is an example, because we've had it franchised now for many, many years. London has got a growing population. So why is its bus use declining? It's now baked in as a declining city for bus use. It's been some years now, year on year decline. And other than this Superloop idea, basically London has never promoted bus travel as a way of getting around the city. It just provides it as information in terms of a utility, but it doesn't encourage you to travel. And here's an example of how things work in London. 3.5 years ago, in Croydon and Sutton, TfL went out to public consultation to make changes to bus routes. It is only early next month, in March, 3.5 years later, that some of those changes are being introduced. You can't run bus operations like this. 3.5 years, things will have changed. You know, can you imagine Tesco or Audi or Waitrose going out to public consultation about how they're going to organise the presentation of their goods on their aisles in their supermarket, getting to know what customers want to say about where things should go? And then 3.5 years later, they introduce the change. It would just be crazy. But the thing is, there's reasons why bus operators actually have coming around to the way of thinking that perhaps it is all now too risky. We've still not recovered fully from COVID. The government £2 maximum fare is limiting revenue growth, because that's the maximum you can get. It's limiting their ability, therefore, to increase costs. All this money that's flowing in through BSIPs is going to end in a couple of years. There's a cliff edge approaching. Driver recruitment can still be an issue. The cost of all this infrastructure to run electric buses. The change of government's going to bring more uncertainty. We've got generally a trend of online shopping, so the use of buses for retail is going, as is some of the workplace. Mondays and Fridays are certainly not as busy as Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays. With the climate situation, we've got extreme weather events. It can wipe out a whole day's takings. Local authorities which want to take control, frankly, you're welcome to some of these risks. And I put it that many local authorities are not geared up to risk-taking. Look at Woking, look at Thurrock, look at Nottingham. They're not in a particularly happy financial place at the moment, and yet many local authorities are saying, yeah, we'll take on all these risks. And I can understand why some of my successors in some of the big groups that are now controlled by people, frankly, who don't have a passion and a lifelong love of buses, such as myself and my compatriots from years past, will say, yeah, let's go for it. Now, finally, I'll leave you with this thought. Buses exist in a dynamic and changing environment. Nothing stands still. Change is inevitable, but you've got to manage change effectively. And in my judgment, the best model is a locally based, in-touch, experienced transport professional, and I emphasize the word transport professional, backed by a skilled team who can make changes which are organised and coordinated in a local way. Someone who's championed buses in a local area. Who employs that person, whether they're in the public or private sector, I think is actually less important than whether the person can work within a long-term commitment to funding. And I leave you with the thought that this route here, the 36, one of the industry's most prestigious routes from Leeds via Harrogate to Ripon, regarded as an absolute class act to travel on. I put it to you, that would never have come about under franchising, never. And I also put it to you, you're not going to double the number of passengers travelling in 20 years. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Stephen, I'm handing my screen back to you and look forward to any discussion.
Thank you so much, Roger. And judging by the chat, there's already lots of people who really want to ask you questions. I'm going to channel those as best I can. There's been some really interesting comments on that, and people have obviously clearly improved, appreciated what you've been saying. Richard Jones, thanks, Roger, an excellent presentation, very enjoyable. Can I just raise a few of the questions?
Please do, yes.
Some people have been asking questions about Brighton's operation itself, then and now. Somebody asked, you combined routes so that routes pass through the city rather than terminated in it. Did that affect usage by reducing the interchange penalty?
Well, whether you run buses through a city centre or terminate in very much depends how the geography of how your city centre is. In our case, in the city, Brighton is very much linked to Hove, and there's a commercial centre of Hove to the west of Brighton's city commercial centre. And there was no doubt there were some residential areas around the city that had communities of interest that crossed the city. It was also the case that the regional hospital is in the east of the city. The universities are in the northeast of the city. So there are needs to provide links from one part of residential area through the commercial centre over to attractions in the other side of the city. And it was also the case that Brighton and Hove didn't have the space for a city centre bus station. And so it was more efficient to run bus routes through wherever possible. But it does vary from one city or town to another, depending on the topography, the geography, the layout of the residential areas compared to the places people wanted to travel to, whether there is a bus station, the location of the bus station, where the railway station is. There's no straight answer.
And somebody also asked about whether when you introduced buses with two doors, did that affect ridership and
that was
operation?
Since I retired that they did that.
Oh, right, okay.
I think it was a reflection of the fact that usage was increasing so much that at the busy city centre bus stops and the key places outside the city, mentioning the hospital and Hove again, for example, where you've got ons and offs at those busy bus stops, it is more efficient to start getting people on while some people are still alighting. But in my day, we didn't go for that. And another factor has been the much greater improvement of CCTV, onboard CCTV. In my day, that wasn't so sophisticated. And so drivers had to rely on mirrors to try and see when people had alighted from centre doors. And quite often, in the past, there were some accidents of people getting off of centre doors. So bus companies were very cautious about centre doors, but some of those reasons have now gone away, and I can see in busy areas why a centre exit is needed. But you do that as a sacrifice of seats downstairs, and you have to have a balance between the number of seats you're providing with a buggy area and a wheelchair area or two, and a centre exit. Sometimes you find there's not enough room for in the number of seats that you want. So it does depend again on the characteristics of the routes and what's happening.
There are one or two people have asked rather similar questions, which is somebody asked, you've given examples of successful initiatives. Was there anything that didn't work out as well as you'd hoped or expected? And somebody also asked about success or failure on bus rail integration. You mentioned the travel centre, and I just wonder whether you've got other examples of things that didn't work out or didn't work out as well as you'd expected, and also examples of successes and failures on bus rail integration.
Yes, there were many things. We were always trying things. I mentioned that I went out and about one half day a week and took managers with me, and I can't emphasize the importance of that to bus companies to actually get out there and travel on buses, because you pick up from that interactions with passengers, and people would often stop me, they'd recognize me and talk to me about what their ideas were. but you pick up what is working and what isn't working. You get a feel for what's out there. And yes, we tried as a result of those things. We tried over the years many things, some of which were successful and some weren't working at all. But the key is, if something isn't working, then pull it off. Don't do it. Change it fairly soon, so that you and learn from that mistake. Now, in terms of bus and rail integration, I was very keen on this because Brighton Station, for those that know the geography, is just awkwardly just a bit to the north of the main commercial hub called the Clock Tower and Churchill Square shopping area of the city. And we wanted to try and improve the links between buses and trains, but particularly ticketing. I was a great believer if you could do it so that improve the fact that you had Plus Bus, which is, in my view, the most undersold, undervalued ticket that there is. It's a hugely beneficial ticket that people can buy a return rail ticket to a town and add on their bus travel within a defined area and have a Plus Bus. I wanted Plus Bus to appear in reverse, so that you could get on a Brighton Hove bus and buy a ticket from the driver that would effectively take you to London on the train, as well as the bus journey to the station. I was very pleased that at the time, the Go Ahead Group, who owned Brighton Hove, also ran the Thameslink franchise at that time. And they were very up for trying something as a trial. And so we introduced a ticket that cost about, I think it was about 12 quid at the time. And that gave you unlimited travel on Brighton Hove's buses and a return journey from Brighton Station to the stations through the Thameslink core, London Bridge to St Pancras. And then after a while, ownership changed and Go Ahead ended up running Southern as well instead, and then as well as Thameslink. And we had a Southern, what's called a Southern Saver and a Thameslink Saver. And those tickets actually still exist today, because once you get them enshrined in a franchise, you can't get rid of them. And I doubt there's many sales of them, because things have not been promoted so much. But nowadays, of course, it's all done by smart cards, or was. Now it's tap and go with contactless. But there are lots of things you can do, I think, to integrate bus pricing with rail pricing, and we're only scratching the surface of it, in my view. But I think it's coming as more and more. We're talking now about rolling out tap and go on the rail network in the southeast bit by bit now, I mean that's one of the benefits of franchising in places like Manchester, West Yorkshire, and Merseyside. Perhaps will be better integration of bus and rail fares.
Yes, somebody asked about that in relation to London, that if it ran on the commercial model, would we have had the cross-modal fares integration which Oyster has enabled? And if not, would this loss matter?
No, I would never countenance the commercial model for London. Never.
No. You just like, it sounds like you just like TfL to be just, promote buses and be a bit more kind of commercially savvy.
Yeah, I think TfL are not proactive enough in encouraging bus travel. And I think the worst thing they ever, I mean, you can't even get a bus map. I mean, it's a nonsense that people arrive in London, visitors from abroad, and they just want to travel perhaps around the central area, let alone people out who might move to the suburbs. And you can't get a bus map. And yet TfL, I mean, you've got me on one now, Stephen. TfL will promote all sorts of underground maps online, but also physically. You can get an underground map. People go mad for the latest underground map, but you can't find out where a bus goes. I mean, how TfL think they can encourage more people to travel when they don't let people know where the buses go in a sort of geographic diagrammatic format? I really don't know. And that's my concern, that TfL, it wouldn't work to have a commercial model running buses in London, but TfL needs to be much more savvy with what bus passengers need, and in terms of to encourage them to travel and use the network.
There have been various people kind of asking about examples that are in places that aren't as bus friendly as Brighton. So we've had somebody asking about rural area. Tricia has asked about the Peak District, and she said on the Trans-Peak route they don't even the bus stops don't have pavements or signs. You're expected to know where to wait on the verge. And I think she also said further, as well, she also said about in the Peak District villages, bus services are 2 hours, buses are cancelled every single day, and a council won't push them in case the operators pull out altogether. And and similarly, Sophie from North Surrey said, do you think it's possible to grow usage in the same way in an area where travel is so decentralized? So I just wondered what your reflections were on places that are rural, are very decentralized, and also, where you haven't got lots of services and so on.
Mm. Well, there are some excellent examples of rural bus provision. I showed two earlier, Links Bus in northwest Norfolk and Delaney north of Peterborough. And key to it here is you can often get small locally owned bus companies that are really they're run by and owned by people who are absolutely in touch with what is needed to provide a successful bus operation, which was why when I was referring to the frequencies of service earlier, I was saying it's not a measure of unsuccess that you're running every 2 hours or maybe 4 times a day. If that's the service provision for the market you're serving and it's appropriate for the market, then that is a success. If it's encouraging people to travel through all the other techniques that I mentioned. I mean, clearly, if someone's quoting that there isn't the infrastructure there, buses are being cancelled, then yeah, there's no hope. That is not a success. That is unsuccessful. That's not. It hasn't got the ingredients in the cake, so to speak, to make it a success. I mean, as I travel around the country, I never fail to be impressed, though, with some of the rural areas that I see and how well they're doing. And you mentioned there's someone quoted Surrey. Surrey County Council in my view, do quite well at promoting bus travel and doing their best in what are quite challenging circumstances. There's no doubt that the demographics and the infrastructure to run buses in parts of Surrey is a world away from a city like Brighton and Hove, because the affluence in some parts of Surrey make it very challenging to run a viable bus network. So it is very much dependent on public funding. But there are some good quality bus operators and bus provision. For example, there's the White Bus, there's Falcon coaches, Falcon buses now come to mind. There's my local operator near here where I live in Sussex, Compass Travel. They run as well. There's Safeguard buses in Guildford. Stagecoach themselves, I think, provide really quite good, decent operations around Surrey. So I think, there's no doubt there are examples where things aren't quite as one would like them to be in rural areas. But again, going to the Peak District, I mean, Derbyshire, I know they've had some financial challenges to meet, but equally, there are some parts of the Peak District where I've been to by bus and with beautiful scenery, hardly anyone living there. It's just out in the middle of nowhere in the Peak District. And you can access it by bus pretty easily, to be honest. But I don't know. I hope I'm not painting too much of a glossy picture, but I think we can sometimes talk down buses too much, saying it's all dire out there. But actually, I think there are some quite good examples of where it isn't, in what are challenging areas.
Mm. So really, yeah, I think this is a theme that's come from other pit work, actually, that actually trying to tell people that actually things could be quite good in even in rural areas, and that actually you want to just spread the knowledge about what's good. And there's several other questions coming in now. Lisa, who is a fellow trustee of ours on bit and was one of the person who actually suggested we do this, I think, says great presentation. In parts of the country with poor bus services, large companies with terrible customer service, and you've been very vocal about that here and on your blogs. Bad information. do you still think that's a better option than franchising?
Well, it's good point, Lisa. What frustrates me, I don't think it is black and white, that franchising or not franchising. For example, as I've said, I think London couldn't sustain the commercial model. And it is going to be interesting to see what happens in the likes of Manchester, Merseyside, West Yorkshire, and South Yorkshire, who seem intent on franchising. Cambridgeshire and the Peterborough combined authority area is interesting. They also say they feel franchising is appropriate, but I'm not convinced, because I've had a look around recently, and a lot of the rural routes out there are already funded to a huge extent by that authority. I mean, I did a blog recently about what I regarded must be Britain's most subsidised bus route at £250 per passenger, £125 per journey. And there's something not quite right already. And these are local authority controlled routes. So by giving those local authorities access to the network in Cambridge, and Peterborough, which should be able to sustain both those cities, sustain a commercially based network of services run by, in both cases, Stagecoach at the moment, it would be far better for Stagecoach to get to grips and provide the best possible service, in my view, with a commercial-minded approach to it, than necessarily politicians and local authority people, and dare I say it, consultants who have no affinity with the local area at all. Because frankly, what often happens is these local authorities that are going to go for franchising or whatever, the first thing they do is appoint consultants who are often international consultants, from global consultants, who know nothing about buses in that particular area, have no affinity with that area. And then you get the complication of political involvement as well, which of course we've got in London at the moment, big time, because this is going out in February 2024, and there's the mayoral elections in May 2024. So surprise, surprise, the bus fares haven't gone up, and we've got Superloop coming in at indecent haste, as quick as possible, to get it in before the Purdah period comes, before the period of election. And therefore, whether it's happening because of good commercial reasons for bus provision, or whether it's happening because a politician sees it as a good way of getting re-elected, those are the complications you get, mixed in with consultants who say, let's put a network like this, let's bring in, dare I mention it, the letters DRT, let's bring in that as well. And frankly, they've got no experience of running buses in Cambridge or Peterborough. So that's why I think it has to be horses for courses.
Right. Thank you. Actually, Eden Blythe, who I think I know is connected to Moore's Bus, has said one of the biggest needs for rural areas is for the connection of disparate services to create a network, but most operators in our area refuse to do so. Have you any suggestions?
Bang heads together, get people around the table and just get them to see it, get them out and about, invite them to travel out on the bus route that doesn't connect, and buy them a cup of coffee or something in the cafe where the bus could have connected, and discuss that while you're waiting for the connection. But don't give up, keep at it, because most bus operators are reasonable people. There would be a reason why it doesn't connect. There must be some consideration. It's got to get back for a school journey, or it's got to do this, it's got to do that, because most bus operators would see the sense in making connections if they were possible. I would have thought, I would hope.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Why? I mean, there's a link. Various people commenting on. There's quite a lot of bad practice in the chat. Somebody says Edinburgh has abandoned real-time information and now has displays that only display the timetable.
Yeah,
so
I
you
know.
might want to.
It comes back to my real worry about local authorities being good on capital expenditure, but it's not so good on revenue expenditure. And
Apparently, these are new displays that they put up, which anyway, something for you to look at possibly. And somebody has commented that Fastlink has suffered from the bad maintenance that you talked about,
absolutely.
and people don't use that, and so on. So yes, there's been some good examples of bad practice in the chat. And somebody has asked, why do you think the larger groups don't do what you have done and seem to be happy managing decline? I'm not sure that's true of all bits of all large groups, but I just wonder, I know you have been quite critical of them.
Yeah, I think that my view is at the moment that we're seeing, whereas in 1986, when deregulation happened, it happened overnight. I mean, I know there was a leading period, and then it was frozen for 3 months afterwards before you could make a change. But generally speaking, the whole regulation of the industry changed overnight. We're seeing now an equivalent change, but it's happening almost incestuously. It's happening gradually. And there's two things at play. There's the which we've already touched on, the sort of franchise thing that's happening, and the large conurbations realizing that they've got the opportunity to take back control, and it will happen bit by bit. But also, as I've also hinted at, the ownership of the large bus groups, First, Arriva, Stagecoach, and Go Ahead, Go Ahead, Stagecoach, and Arriva are no longer owned in this country. They're owned by equity groups. They're owned by investment people. They haven't got leaders who are steeped in the bus industry tradition, and they're bringing a whole new approach to the way of running buses. There is no doubt. And some of them will just see it as a contractual type of operation, and they won't be interested so much that if passengers are in decline, provided if it goes out to contract, if it goes out to in a franchise and they win a successful bid, they won't be interested, as bus operators in London aren't interested. They're not interested in how many people travel. No one cares whether a London bus, a bus operator, has one passenger on or is full. They're just interested in getting their contract price and the incentive to get the bus on time in London, in particular, to get the contract, the incentive that they'll be paid. And it's a different discipline. It's a different way of approach, and that it does worry me personally, because I think there's a disconnect then between the passenger and the person running the bus providing the service for the passenger.
And a sort of flip side to that, somebody's asked, do you think that starting as an independent operator is still viable in this day and age?
Well, there are one or two around, and I'm delighted to see they're giving it a good go. There's a company called Vectari, run by some really energetic young people. I've been along to the Young Bus Professional conferences. They're really good people, and they're doing some amazing things in the East Midlands, down in Hertfordshire and Essex now as well. But there are few like them now coming into the industry as new operators. And that's the other thing under franchising. There isn't really a role for small bus companies in the future. And we've seen already in Manchester a couple now pass out from what used to be running, bus routes in the area.
There's a couple of related questions. Somebody who said that they're bewildered by bus economics, and leaving aside subsidies, approximately what level of loading enables a bus service to break even? Zahira Plummer has said they about the size of buses, because I think that's related to the loading and so on. And in Oxford, people ask for small ones all the time, and it's hard to shift from big to small for peaks. Drivers are more expensive than empty capacity. But is this true? Are there other reasons? She'd like to be able to explain why not have smaller buses to people. And in a way, I think those are similar, two sides of the same question, aren't they?
You just don't save proportionately the costs, unfortunately. Well, not unfortunately, but it is the case that the driver's wages, the cost of fuel, the cost of maintaining the vehicle, they absolutely dominate, and so you don't save very much by having less seats on the bus. And what you do is restrict the availability, the ability to use that bus in the peak time, often taking school children to school, which is the basis of the economics of many rural bus routes. If you can get a good load of school children going into school and coming out of school in the afternoon, and you can work around those peak journeys, provision of bus services to rural areas in the off peaks at a fairly good marginal rate. And similarly, evenings and Sunday operations can be provided in towns and cities on a marginal basis, because the economics of the bus has been paid for during the day. Can I just mention, because it's coming up quite a bit soon, I see there's a few comments from someone who regularly comments on my blog called Richard Jones from the West Midlands, and he mentions what are my thoughts on the Mayor of West Midlands approach to the partnership model rather than franchising. And Richard, I think that is a very good point. I think it is going to be extremely interesting to see the way things go in the West Midlands, where we've got Andy Street as the mayor, who's working very closely with National Express West Midlands and the other operators, Rotala, Diamond Bus, and others as well. And it seems to be a completely different approach in the West Midlands to what's happening in Manchester with Andy Burnham and the operators there and franchising. And I think it is going to be fascinating to see how that does, those two models, if that's what comes about, how they do pan out over the next 5 to 6 years. And it is horses for courses. It may be that it is the appropriate thing for Manchester, and it is the appropriate thing for the West Midlands.
Barnaby has asked a couple of questions. One is about the fact that Brighton and Hove seem to be rolling back on low emission vehicles. They've just ordered 40 diesel ones, and I wondered whether you've got views on that. I think it's the same person, has also asked about, given your experience on bus transport, do you see the need and viability for other measures of public transport such as trams?
Well, on that first, it's just the economics of tram operation. I mean, you can probably, it is, the large cities have got it working, but even in Manchester, I mean, it's financially quite challenging. The Tyne and Wear Metro is running into lots of problems at the moment financially. None of these systems can afford to replace the infrastructure that buy new trams. They're dependent on government funding for that. So it would be hugely challenging, I think, to bring in trams. But there's no doubt in the large conurbations, they do have a role to provide decent public transport. Sorry about that. Hang on a sec. Just get rid of that. My landline never rings. Would you believe it's just wrong? And but on Brighton and Hove bringing in diesel buses, I don't know enough about the economics these days of the electric infrastructure and diesel buses. But what I do know from the limited experience I have is that there are issues with supply, that quite often the electricity company, the power companies, can't supply the bus companies with enough electric power that's needed to power the buses. And so there are long timescale delays before you can necessarily bring in. And it's the same with hydrogen as well. So I think as a stopgap measure, a lot of bus companies are now also, as I saw in Reading yesterday, bringing in fleets of diesel buses. But it has to be said, a Euro 6 diesel bus environmentally is really, really good compared to, in my time, we had Euro 1, Euro 2, Euro 3. Things have really moved on technologically wise with diesel engines. And in many cases, it has to be that, because you can't just plug in a bus in a 3-pin socket and expect to recharge it. You've got to have infrastructure, and you need the power companies on board for that. So that may be the reason, but I'm not close enough to know.
final questions, because we're coming up to the end. Somebody's a young professional in rail who's passionate about sustainable travel, feels stymied about being able to do anything at the moment. What careers advice do you have, please? Would your answer be to attend the Young Bus Professionals?
Yeah, come along to our Young Bus Professionals conference in Glasgow in later on in March. You'll be very, very welcome, and get a feel for how the bus industry is going compared to the rail industry, which I mean, the rail sector at the moment is, yeah, absolutely sort of come to a red signal, waiting to know which way it's going to go. Can I also just mention, while saying Young Bus Professionals, thanks for mentioning it at the beginning, Stephen, we are very keen to encourage people working in the local authority sector as well, which is why we've rebranded as to Young Bus Professionals, and indeed young people working in consultancies as well that deal with bus operations. It would be a really good opportunity to cross-mix and cross-fertilize.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks to, I think everybody who's been on this will say, will have appreciated what you've had to say. And there's been one question, your favorite cake, since you've been talking about cakes. Somebody asked what your favorite, Mark Pross.
All right, well, I'm a vegan, so I'll take an eggless cake.
Right, thank you very much. Thanks ever so much to Roger for doing that. I think it's been full of good examples. I hope it's encouraged people who've got poor bus service in their area to realise that they can do better. I think Eden might want you to come and help him bang heads together in the Yorkshire Dales for connecting buses. It sounds like they've had a lot of problems. So thank you very much. Thanks to everybody who's put comments in and questions. I hope you all appreciated this. There will be more FIT webinars in the future. Please keep an eye on the integratedtransport.org.uk website. And thanks also to Roger for all his work in FIT over the years in terms of providing really good advice and support for the rest of us as trustees, particularly around buses. Thank you very much.